Hi, it's Roz, and back for another scallydandle. And today we're going to be going to Burundi in East Africa in the company of Therese Toyi and her book Weep Not Refugee. And in the course of this video, I think naturally that's going to lead me to a bit of thinking and talking about books about refugees and migrants, which, given the week that I'm recording this, is inevitably going to touch on the American Dirt controversy. And then at the end of the video, and I must remember before I go, I'm going to invite anyone who is thinking of reading the Lost Children archive in the near future to maybe comment and share, potentially share that read with me in some way, because it's a book I'm really looking forward to. So, refugees, migrants, very much one of the key topics politically, I guess, at the moment has been for the last sort of 10-15 years, very high on the agenda. It's not new, is it? Human beings have always moved around and have always been displaced by wars and natural disasters and political events, and yeah, of course they have. As countries developed in a more fixed way and fixed borders, and then those borders have come to be policed and controlled, the sort of our understanding around that has changed, and obviously that's happened at a different rate in different parts of the world. But certainly, I guess it's only in the 20th century that you really get the concept of the refugee, although here in the UK we've had many others, Huguenots or whatever over the centuries, and there always has been that movement, but there's something kind of certainly like currently there's almost an obsession and paranoia about refugees and migrants. The book that I read that I'm talking about today, Weep Not Refugee, is actually about a refugee crisis, you might say, that happened in the latter part of the 20th century in the Great Lakes area of East Africa, connected to civil war and genocide in Burundi and Rwanda, and yes, wars involving the Democratic Republic of the Congo, also known as Zaire, and so on. Complex, and but that's the context for that book. So that's that. As I say, the current obsession is this is not a new issue. I think, and I'll be really interested to know what you think, that obviously it's really, really important that things like this are reported and in a factual way, and that first-hand voices are gathered, first-hand experiences, and that non-fiction is written that analyses it. Histories are written, and political works. But I think there is a particular place for fiction about issues like any political issue, but issues like refugees and migrants, that in writing fiction that draws on those experiences or explores those experiences, that helps those of us that have not had that experience understand it better. It's a necessary and valuable thing, I think. Now, this is where it's really interesting to me this week, the controversy there's been about American Dirt, which is a white American woman's, I think she's American, not Canadian, pretty sure, book about about Mexican migrants, as it were. And she got like a 7-figure advance for this book, writing a story that there are many authors of sort of Latin origin I think Latinx is the current term, are writing about, want to write about, can't get published about, do get published but struggle to be published about. And here's this book that has got huge promotion, and there's a whole questioning of, is that okay, is that appropriate, is that right, is there something wrong about that novel, and should those publishers have not chosen to run with it. Now I'm going to link below to a video by another booktuber who many of you will know, Alba, who's booktubes from Puerto Rico, and her perspective on American Dirt and the controversy, which I think is really interesting, and she then links to others. What interests me, I suppose, is I think why is there something different about that than, say, Mohsin Hamid, who's a British Pakistani author, Pakistani origin and upbringing, but also lived in America and the UK. A couple of years ago, he wrote a book, Exit West, a great book which I really liked, found really interesting, and it's about migrants, and it's very clearly based on the Syrian refugee crisis that is obviously still current. And no one said that he shouldn't be writing that book, I think. And to give another example, Ali Smith, who's Scottish, is writing a series of books at the moment with the names of seasons that are like kind of state of the nation books about the UK, and her book Spring has a kind of major theme about the detention of immigrants in the UK, and that to me is a very important thing for her to include in a book about the current state of things in the UK. And she has a particular interest in it. She's been involved in a refugee voice project, so she brings an understanding to it that goes beyond her own personal experience as a white Scottish person who lives in the country that she came from. I think that what makes those books okay and possibly makes American Dirt not okay is the level of understanding that those authors have brought to what they write, that is drawing on their own experience and their own knowledge, but not kind of like appropriating somebody else's experience and it kind of for a big advance. Or maybe it's not the fault of the writer that wrote the book. It's more about the choices of the publishers and who else they choose to publish, isn't it? So it's not wrong for some people to write about things outside their own experience, but if you are writing outside your own experience, then you have to be really careful to be sensitive and thoughtful, and if you're a publisher, you need to also think, who are the authors writing for whom? If it's a contemporary issue, are there writers who have that experience, and that it would be better perhaps to publish or to also publish? That's my thoughts. I don't know. But certainly I know for myself, I'm particularly interested in books that come to a topic with some kind of personal knowledge that might might for me not just be a good novel, but also bring me a kind of an understanding and something that is outside my experience, and hence being and an example, say, about sort of refugees and migrants would be African Titanics by Abu Bakr Kahal, who's an Eritrean writer now living in Denmark, and he wrote that, and I think it might be 2008, but about the migrants who take the incredibly risky journey across the Mediterranean trying to get to Western Europe, often after being sort of very tough journeys to get to North Africa from where they set off. It's a book I would warmly recommend. But he's very deliberately chosen to write a novel, not a memoir, and to use the fact that he is writing, and this is what I was meaning about fiction having a particular role here. He's chosen fiction as, I think, as his medium, because it means he can say things that go beyond his own experience, and but that he is aware of, so that it sort of it's not about analysing it, but it's about expressing that in a way that other people can hear and learn from, but it broadens it beyond sort of one person's story, if that makes sense. So yeah. Now, Weep Not Refugee is written by the author, Therese Toyi. I've tried to find out a bit about her. Surprisingly difficult to find out much about her. What I do know is that she's from Burundi. She went to university in Burundi, because you can find that out online, and she's now an academic at a university in Nigeria. That's about and she is or was a member of the Pan-African Parliament, so she's obviously someone with quite strong political interests. And I think that her choosing to write Weep Not Refugee, you can just tell reading it, she thought this is an important topic to write about, and I'm going to write about it. I may write academic things, but for my novel, I'm wanting to explore the experience of child refugees from Burundi, and she obviously felt that was an important topic to write about, and she's used a novel to do it. Now, I suppose if you it's hard. I would say that as a novel, it's not an extraordinarily good novel, this, if to me, but it is a fascinating one, and I think she wrote it originally in English, and sometimes when you read something like this, you think, oh, has something been lost in translation? What's going on here? I think, but with her novel, I think I had some of those, in a way, similar questions of thinking, is the way she's written this, is the structure of it, and the language and approach, is that deliberate stylistic choice to try and relating to the topic matter, or is it just that she was like a first-time novelist and was just that's what she could do. It's quite disjointed in many ways, the book, and episodic. Now, actually, that, I think, possibly it reflects the refugee experience. So, and again, this is interesting. We, certainly in the UK, politically, there's all this sort of anxiety about, refugees is somehow that, there's going to be, we're somehow we have a tide of them coming here. Now, the reality is that the majority of refugees are living close to their country of origin in less developed countries, in refugee camps, and very often have the experience of really prolonged periods of living in limbo, in a kind of stateless situation. So and that is the case in this book. So the main character, Wache, his mother was fled the genocide, Hutu Tutsi genocide that was part of the Burundian civil war. She's a Hutu. She's raped by a Tutsi man in the course of flight, and is her son, the main character in the book, was conceived due to that rape. And you see little episodes of her early time in the camp. It's probably in Tanzania. That's never said, but that the majority of the Burundian refugees at that point went to Tanzania, I believe. So in the camp, you see the UNHCR officials, how they interact with the refugees, how the host country views and interacts with the refugees, growing up, getting an education or not, his experience of that. He goes back to Burundi at one point. He comes back again. So there's this episodic quality, and I guess your life is very disjointed if you're in that position. So that's perhaps a kind of a deliberate choice on her part. There's also a kind of like a kind of in a way quite an odd distancing about how she describes, or is a result of how she describes the events in the book and his thinking. It's like we're always one step away, and again, you as a reader, I wasn't entirely sure whether that was because she couldn't write a character to whom you were felt, I don't know, closer, or whether that's actually a reflection of kind of like the trauma she's trying to convey. So all the way through, I was having these sort of uncertainties, I suppose, about what I was reading. There's a couple of places where it just gets a bit weird, like when he's back in Burundi, he ends up being arrested for not having the right papers, and which I'm sure is a common experience, and one of the police officers or immigration officials who is keeping him there turns out to be his father. Or is he really his father? It's like they recognise each other, but obviously they've never met. The man was only there to conceive him. Is it a kind of like a guilt thing on his part, that because he knows that he raped women at the time that this young man was conceived, so it could be his son, or have they really recognised each other? Later on, this man sort of reappears when the main character does make a more successful life for himself eventually. So and towards the end of the book, you're not quite sure what's real and what is possibly him becoming sort of more and more mentally disturbed as a result of all his sort of trauma and experience, and what the borders between sort of reality and perhaps what's in his mind become more and more uncertain. And again, I think that's disconcerting as a reader, but is also perhaps a deliberate choice on the part of the author. So a book I would recommend, but not if you're interested in what happened in Burundi and Rwanda in the latter part of the 20th century, but not book perhaps that I'd recommend just as, this is a good read. That's I mean, perhaps just look at the subject matter. It's not going to be a fun read, is it? But it will it will interest you if you want to understand a bit more about that experience. So that's it for talking about Weep Not Refugee. If you want to read a completely different book about the experiences of a refugee child, I'm just going to recommend, and earlier in the 20th century, Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr, who died a year ago, roughly, and which is a kind of, it's her young adult, I suppose you'd call it now, novel, but based on her own life experience as a refugee from Nazi Germany, but rewritten in the form of a novel, and one that you can share with older children, and a lovely book. But what is so different about her experience is that she was able then to settle in the UK. Ultimately, she took a while to get here, but ultimately, and to make a life and a happy, successful life that ended up with her being a kind of bit of a figure of held in great affection in this country for her children's books about Mog the cat and so on. And I guess what Toyi is conveying in her book is that where refugees aren't allowed to then settle and make a real home in the country to which they flee, that then their lives are ruined by that. I think that's kind of essentially her message. Now, before I go, I said I am hoping this month to read The Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli, which, rather than American Dirt, which is a book by a Mexican-American author, which talks about the Mexican American sort of migration border issues with people from Central America, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. I've heard some brilliant things about it from some other booktubers like Brian at Bookish and Mark Nash, and it's just come out in paperback in the UK, so I'm thinking that there might just be other people who are also planning on reading it at the moment. If you are, please do comment, because maybe we could discuss it a bit as we read it, and before I get to make a video about it, I might be able to pick up on some of your thoughts and comments and bring that into that. Have a great week.